Hello viewers, welcome back to Candid Conversations with Ganesh Kuppala. Here we are with another very insightful session today. I'm personally super excited to talk about this topic. You know, I love children, right? And I always love to talk about any stuff which related to children. It's even more exciting today because I have an expert who has done extensive amount of job in the last two or three decades in his area of work. And I have Dr. Malhar with us. Welcome to studio, Dr. Malhar. Thank you so much. You flown in all the way from India very recently. When did you get in here?
Day before yesterday.
Okay, great. So how are you finding London? Is it your first visit?
Yes, it's my first visit. Absolutely loving it. I've had clear skies and everyone's telling me it's not raining yet. So it's been beautiful.
London can be deceptive, right? Especially British summers. They always say, you find something always new. It's amazing. Welcome to London, by the way. I'm super excited, as I was telling at the beginning of the conversation, that I love the stuff which goes with children, and I've seen your amount of work. I mean, I've seen your TEDx speeches. I've seen your other kind of stuff as well. You've done extensive amount of work. Do you want to quickly start with your introduction so my audience know who you are, and then we will get into details?
Yep. Of course, I'm Dr. Malhar. I primarily work in the field of diabetes and obesity. We run a sort of global setup now from Pune, India. And it's just been an overall healthcare journey. I did my master's from New Zealand in pediatric obesity is my area of specialization, even psychology. Yeah. So all of it was all geared initially towards children, but then we started to broaden it towards families. So, children, of course, dependent on the family setup. So I realized that just working with children in isolation wasn't working. Yeah. So after that, I kind of broadened to family setup. So last 10 years, all we've been doing is reversing diabetes and preventing diabetes and obesity as a mission. So it's been
amazing. So you started working with children as a topic, right? For you. Yeah. So you said in New Zealand. I mean, was there a reason why you chose New Zealand to do your medicine?
New Zealand had the highest medals per million. Okay. When I went there, I found that every school there was producing Olympians. So I went on to study how they're doing that, because in India, of course, medals per billion now is tougher. And I realized that what they do is very different. So, and Kiwis are very... they're like Aussies. That culture is very sporty. So I wanted to bring that culture, to other parts of the world. So
sounds very interesting. So what caught my attention is a couple of things that you said in your TEDx, right? One of the things were like people talk about obesity as an item, or diabetes and all. We used to talk about, you were giving this analysis of 1960s. People used to have obesity at the age of 70s, 60s, somewhere around that. And come 1970s, it reduced to 50 years of age. Then you gave that analogy, right? And now I'm really disheartened seeing some of the kids, right? 5-year-old, 6-year-old having issues with diabetes, having issues with obesity. So why don't we quickly start with that? Like, what is the biggest reason for, especially, when we talk about obesity, we talk about food, your lifestyle and all that stuff, right? And that, yes, you're right, to adults, grown-ups, they have to do certain changes to their lifestyle to bring it back. But when you talk about 5-year-old, what he or she could have done? So what's your view on that?
The onset of obesity, of course, has become earlier. Of course, now we are seeing 25-year-olds having almost 25% increase suddenly in the last 10 years. And it's largely affluence would be one of the major categories. So in urban cities, it's more as opposed to rural, where there's still more of a labor economy. We're more of an intellectual economy now. A lot of IT and tech, and so that the baseline activity levels have dropped, of course. And again, food has become a convenience thing. So again, I always believe that we are always a reflection of socio-economic factors. If you're going to work, feed 7 billion with reducing arable land, there's going to be more food processing, and we have to turnaround times have to increase of crops. So the same nutrition value that was there pound for pound is going to decrease. But we are still used to a certain volume of food. So, of course, the calorie intake has increased, but the nutrition has decreased. So, we're just eating more than we used to. Okay. And again, the number of children overall in per family, because of the cost, is becoming lesser. Yeah. So, the spread of calorie intake across 4 or 5 children, which was earlier, is now all given to one child. So, it's just a bunch of factors. I wouldn't blame anyone. We're just seeing a very fast gestation. What should have taken decades to set in, diabetes, obesity, are 25-year gestation diseases. They're starting to set in, in a decade or two, which is just what it is, again. And I think families will have to take cognizance of this shift. It has nothing to do with personality or just pure. A 5-year-old doesn't know what depression is.
Yeah, exactly.
We can't just turn around and say, oh, the kid's depressed, or
Yeah.
run some kind of psycho tests on the kid. It's more to do with the environment.
Mm.
So the grandparent got it at 60, the parent at 40, the kids below 20. So it's just what it is. We have to acknowledge the acceleration and take steps. We don't have to keep looking for individual causes.
Yeah. But does it have anything to do with the global, ways of living? Like we talk about in the Paris summit, right? They talked about COP 26, 27, like whatever it is, right? I mean, eventually, the way you love your environment, the way you live, and the food intake that you're taking, is that all drives into this? Do you agree on that, or is it like broadly individual, specific, family specific thing?
I think it finally comes down to you undergoing a learning curve. It's like making a living.
Okay.
You're going to finally have to get out there and create value and make a living. Similarly, with the food, you have to get nutrition focused. So the earlier a child learns to separate food from nutrition, which is, okay, that's where my nutrition's coming from. And this is where indulgence is. Like we all know high sugar, high carb, processed carbs, refined, stuff like that. We know everything. But the question is, if a child doesn't have options,
Yeah.
it's going to. But then again, it's an environmental thing. If all the families are doing is buying processed food, the kids' intake starts increasing. So I read a scary statistic which showed that I think per capita sugar consumption is now close to 40 grams per child per day, which is incredible. At our time it was 5 to 10 grams. So these are real world statistics, and the per capita calorie intake. Again, I would love to differentiate between developed countries and sort of developing countries. In a developed country, you will see more obesity in the poor sections of society. Whereas in underdeveloping, you will see more obesity because the convenience increases, so people tend to hire other people to do their work.
Yeah.
Whereas here, the hobbies increase. Like I see UK, it's fantastic, the kind of, fitness that one sect of the population has.
Correct.
And there's a complete other sect where it's not there. So I think we're going to polarize the world into two. When we say 50% overweight obesity, that's half who's very active and very half, and the other half who's not.
Yeah.
So it's again like the haves and have-nots.
That's a very interesting stat because that's a very good segue to my next question as well. Because I was reading through when I was researching about your profile and all, then I thought you spend a lot of time in India, but the obesity capital is United States, for example, right?
Per capita, yes.
Yeah, per capita. You rightly mentioned about haves and have-nots or the developed economies and all. US is the most prominent developed economy, but you still see diabetes and obesity raising a lot. So what do you think the major, is it again, I'll come back to the same question. There are two elements of obesity or diabetes, right? One is food intake.
Yeah.
Two is they talk about genetic
of course.
stuff as well. And there's another element of, your body exercise and all that stuff, right? How do you want to differentiate with these three? Like what are the different categories or major parameters you want to say? Like, food intake is, I don't know whether you have to prioritize and say that's the biggest or this is a small, like how do you categorize it?
Yeah, again, when you take something like twins that have been raised in separate families, adopted separately, you will see that environment does play a factor, but they still develop the same kind of weight gain.
Yeah.
So what happens is their shape may be different based on the activities they pursue in the different families, but studies have shown that at the end of the day, the weight does come. So genetics plays a huge role. You can't outrun your genetics. You can only suppress it temporarily by sort of going on diets, but weight gain is inevitable. What I personally believe is fat gain is optional.
Okay.
So you will gain weight one way or the other. So you take any society, initially we see menopausal women as the first segment that gains weight. After that, you tend to see children starting to gain. And then you see the poorer sections. When you see the poor sections being the largest sector, you know that an entire society has started to rise. Because I come back to how do you feed 1 billion people? You have to fry something. You have to put it in, and that's how you preserve it as well.
Yeah.
And you sell it in packets with processing. There's no other way. How do you get 2,000 calories to 30 million, 40 million people? So preservation is the future. We're just going to have to find ways because you can't have fresh food, cold chains running at that depth. So again, these are just real world problems of feeding 7 billion, 8 billion people. So like I said, end of the day, activity is in your control. If the families prioritize activity, there's going to be some future for the kids. Otherwise, as I saw in the last endocrinology conference, a scary stat where one of them, the senior endocrinologist, said we are the first generation, the 80s and 90s parents, who are actually going to outlive our children. So we have had active childhoods, and with medicine adjusted living,
That's painful.
yeah, we are actually going to live to 80, 90 with modern medicine and with vaccinations and everything. But given the next generation's early onset of chronic diseases, they may not pull off 60.
my
So
God.
these are real world statistics, and again, it's what it is. I think every family has to just step up and understand, yeah, we can keep talking about genetics, 60%, 50%, but 40, 50% still environmental. And yes, body types. You've inherited a larger body type. You do.
Yeah.
But can you keep look at Dwayne Johnson.
Yeah.
A large 125, 30 kgs, but at what fat percent?
Yeah.
10,
Yeah.
15? So you can be athletic,
Yeah.
irrespective of the weight.
It's very interesting. And I always hear this, problem, especially from the Indian origin or Indian families. Like, we are 1.5 billion people. So whatever India faces the problem, it's 20% of the world, right? So the biggest issue that I hear from most of the Indian parents is, mera beta khana nahi kar raha hai. Like, my son is not eating. My daughter is not eating. When we go back and ask, like, in UK especially, for example, UK primary education gets a meal in the school. I think India does as well. But there is a way to feed in the schools. They have, as you rightly mentioned, nutrition, categorized food.
Yeah.
There's something with fiber, something with carbs, something with protein and all. But when you can come back home, they're like, you're not eating rice. That's the biggest problem that Indian parents
native
have.
food, yeah.
Native food, right? I mean, how do you solve this problem? And I'm sure you'd have heard about from your clients as well.
Yeah.
My son doesn't eat food. When you talk about what food you mean, for majority of our population, Maharashtra, Telugu, Tamil, like South Indian, or it's all about rice. They want to feed kids with
Yeah, but
bunch
again,
of rice.
grandparents have been eating that stuff for donkey's years, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's not the rice.
But is it a carb primary issue?
We Indians are not vegetarians or non-vegetarians. We are carbitarians. So we need carb in every meal. But then you know what? 70% carb has been a staple for the world that was laborious in profession. When you were performing labor, it was okay to take that kind of calorie intake. Now we are seeing it's become a vicious cycle. Too much carb plus too much fat plus fried carbohydrate and 10-15% protein. There is going to be an obesity revolution because the activity levels have changed. Where if you take per capita, India used to be 1600 calories per head when we grew up per day. Now it has slowly gone up to 2400. The US is at 3600. The Middle East is at 34. They are also larger body types. They are, they look much larger and much bigger. But that's coming at a price. Those who are athletic are fine. Those who aren't athletic are beginning to develop these kind of lifestyle metabolic diseases. Because the metabolic pressure, if you're born with a particular weight, let's say you're about at 18, let's say you were 80 kgs, you can at the most pull off 15% on that. Beyond that, your organs aren't going to be able to service that size. So you have to learn to keep it within 15-20%. That's the hypertrophy zone. But we are seeing that children are hitting that zone at 18. The baseline is becoming 100. So I have so many children globally reporting to me who are above 130, 140, 150.
And what age?
This is between 18 to 22. And that's the baseline now.
Wow.
Now, yeah, in your mind, you could bring it down to genetics, you could bring it down to environment. You can keep looking for causes. It's that kid who has to take control at the end of the day.
Yeah.
The parents can enable support, but yeah, and I've seen a lot of children take. So when I chat with them, they're very keen to step up. But my worry is when that becomes the new normal. When you have more obese kids in a school than not. We're already seeing it. I've been a couple of schools here in UK I was watching, and there are significantly more. I mean, 25-30% now.
The biggest problem in UK at the moment in the schools is the mental health issues below 15, below 12 years old. And so some of the studies says it's to do with their body types as well. Like, mental health cannot be separated from physical health as well. And you rightly work in that area. And that's the primary reason I was actually bringing you onto the show. So if you can quickly tell me, how does your mental health is driven by physical health primarily?
Yeah.
And when you speak, you do a lot of counseling to the kids. Do they come back and tell, some of the kids were bullied because of their weight and whatever it is, and then that they ended up getting into depression, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Is that the story? Yeah.
There's a lot of diagnostics now in the field of mental health. So a lot of people are looking for a particular condition which they allopathy has always been traditionally diagnostic driven. So even with mental health, a lot of mothers tell me, oh, he's got XYZ, whether it's ADHD or whatever. There's always a rush to diagnose and then medicate. And again, we're still fitting into some kind of perfect human theory where everyone has a 180 IQ, or he's not normal, he's subnormal, or he's got a BMI of 21, he's athletic, or he's subnormal. We are not making room for variability in the human race, physical competency and intellectual. So I think we have to acknowledge that not all of us can be medicated into perfection. So that when you keep telling a child that there's something wrong with you, I think at some point that child's going to grow up with a lot of anxiety. For one, the parents are always telling him, and that's someone living with you all the time who's telling you you're an underperformer. It's toxic, you know. And then you get a diagnostic test telling you that yes, you are
Proving it. Yeah.
I think that's crazy.
It is.
I think then all of us would have had some condition or the other. And what are we benchmarking to? I don't see what the benchmark is. Look at the variety of human beings. You're going to have 7 billion fit into a box, So I think we have to make room for imperfection.
Yeah.
We have to, as parents, and again, it's coming down to, it's like the Chinese called it the 4-2-1. You have 4 grandparents, 2 parents, and 1 child. So all the pressure of expectation of everything.
The pyramid. Yeah.
The resources are available.
Yeah.
But the pressure is incredible.
I know.
It's coming at a price. I've given you everything. Now why aren't you performing? Everyone can't be an Elon Musk, yeah? And even he's not perfect. And you can see how much effort he puts in. But it's not so easy for a child sitting at 18 to visualize a vision. And most of us at 40 don't have a vision what to do with our lives. You're expecting an 18-year-old to spew wisdom on what he wants to do. And that somehow, like with obesity, I always tell the kids, it's not what you're eating. It's what's eating you. There's something eating you under your head. And the same thing ate all of us.
Yeah.
But for them, it's being fed, which is really bothering me. And not in all their cases. Many of them have supportive parents. Like you said, the toxic relationship may be coming from outside the house. True. But I think as parents, we can sort of create that little bit of buffer saying, you know what, there's no perfection.
Yeah.
It's all good. Come home.
Don't worry, you're perfect.
Come home.
That's
You're
what
fine. You're fine as you are.
Yeah.
And we'll take our time.
Yeah.
It's an 80, 100-year life, man. Take your time. There's no rush. Go see the world. You'll figure out that refined carbs affect you. So you'll figure it out. And at some point, you let it go. I have found with my own parenting that having faith, that you had faith in yourself, it still took you 20, 30 years to turn yourself around. Have faith in your kids, it'll take them. But give the resources. Don't do transactions, man, all the time, Do this, you'll get this. Don't do this, I'll withdraw this. I think that transactional parenting is so old because they are getting their knowledge and inspiration from social media.
I know.
They don't need you anymore.
So I was speaking to one of my colleague who's well learned, educated. He's a PhD himself, but in the field of energy somewhere, right? But not in the medicine area. And he was such a fit guy at the young age. And then he suddenly, like somewhere around 24, 25, started picking up weight. And he's overweight to the extent where he can't take it now, right? He's around 35, 40, somewhere around that age bracket. And he comes back to me, and I was telling him that, I'm going to interview you today. And he told me that, can you ask him this question? That because he has so much of knowledge, he's well educated, he does research a lot of stuff, And then he came up to this, somebody asked me to eat millets. So I've tried for 3 months. Somebody asked me to do OMAD, like 1 meal a day. Yeah. Somebody said interim fasting. Then I tried that. Somebody said you can't take carbs. Then I tried that. In the last 3 years, he tried 12 or 13 different methodologies. Someone comes with some methodologies, some rule out, says like, this is the way to go about life. How do you deal with this? I mean, do clients come to you and say, okay, I've tried all these methodologies, but I'm not losing it? And it's not that he don't go to gym, like he does. But the problem is once you're overweight, your body cannot, you cannot do treadmill for 30 minutes. That's not practical.
Yeah, true.
So how do you solve this problem? Is there a solution at all? Or answer to this particular person who tried 12, 13 types of things.
The answer is setting the right goals first. If weight gain is in your destiny, you settle down. Like I have gained 25 kg since I was 18 years old. That's a normal weight gain, but I haven't gained a gram of fat since then.
Okay.
The challenge is how do you not keep talking? As a human race, we are going to get heavier because of resources available, but we need not get fatter.
Okay.
So the fat percent has to be below 20. And you see, any of these conditions, they are directly proportional to fat percent, to visceral fat. They are not proportional to weight.
Okay.
So we have to stop talking about weight. Otherwise, the child will grow up in a complex thinking, I'm overweight, I'm obese. You're not. You're just over fat percent. So I know, like even me, my BMI is 27, but my fat percent is 12. Dwayne Johnson, BMI 34, fat percent is not probably single digits. It's fine to be overweight. We have to normalize that. And someday we will reset the markers in terms of BMI to maybe 30.
I want to underline this statement that you're saying. Guys, it is fine to be overweight. If it is in
Definitely.
your destiny,
Yeah.
you'll be there. But as Dr. Malhar is saying, it's understanding the balance, making sure that your fat is not increasing, right?
Your quality of life has to be maintained.
Okay.
If your mobility is getting affected and you have fat, as it's called ectopic fat, which is in the wrong places, like in between the thighs, not letting you run, or on your hips in women, it creates a little difficulty biomechanically. Then you realize you need to go do something. Other than that, I think it's just a lot of hullabaloo about nothing. We're just making a lot of discussion on, and if you've got the gene from both sides, then weight gain is inevitable. And high calorie environments are an inevitability. What I get frustrated with this field is people are on a diet 365 days
Yeah.
a year. That's not possible. You can't move from a diet to the next to the next. You have to settle down with a certain level, saying, I'm not going to be perfect. Why am I trying? Let me just settle down at 100 kgs. But can I get a fitter 100 kg body where I'm athletic, I'm climbing mountains, I'm doing everything I want to do, but I just don't look ripped. Again, we have this Instagram version of fitness, which is crazy because there's a lot of genetic talent there, which looks incredible with six packs. It took me a lot of time to overgrow that myself. That's not fitness. That's the 0.1%. That's the Roger Federers of the world. Why are we constantly talking about? Then you have to just live on pills and pouches. It's possible. You can live on pills and pouches, which is just nutraceuticals on one side and protein powders. You do that, that's very targeted. Your fat percent come down to 0. But I find that the discipline and the kind of motivation to do that is also a talent. It's not something that comes naturally. And again, is your situation in life permitting you to just do that? If it does, then maybe you'll do it for a few years. And then you move on to larger things in life. So I just don't think that we should create benchmarks of fitness. It's not all or none. Got to make room for imperfection, like I said.
Brilliant. And what's the most practical way to get to this? So you said, now we understand the problem. There is a problem. But what is the easiest and most practical way? Is it like change in lifestyle? You talked about a lot in your speeches. I saw that as well. But what is that initial 1, 2, 3 steps that I have to take?
Yeah.
Or somebody has to do? Like, if you can explain.
I still will always believe that you have to find the point of leakage for you.
Okay.
So there is always 1800, 2000 calories is our daily need for performing just our basic bodily functions, mobility, getting some nutrition. So that essential piece need not be overthought. As children, we ate all kinds of foods. We drank the Cokes, Pepsis. We were fine. We were really active, and a lot of that energy was going to growth. Once you're an adult, you may not need that much surplus energy unless you're running marathons on weekends. But the key is, where are you overdosing in terms of basic calories? So if you're telling me I'm eating Indian food and local food, if you're somewhere abroad, then you're adding too many calories. So can you just stick to one source of nutrition? If you like, let's say, Mexican food, and that's your phase of life right now, just have Mexican food. It's fine. If you want to have just Indian food, stick to Indian food. It's fine. But you can't have all the cuisines in a week.
Don't confuse your body too much.
I did my own study last month, and I found that in 1 week, I had 50 different sources of food.
Wow.
My gut has to handle so much. And that's incredible. I mean, imagine what gut flora are you going to maintain, and that's the flexibility of the gut. I think it's just like a car. You learn to fill it the right amount according to its fuel tank, and you run the car, and that's life. But beyond that, if you just keep filling it every opportunity you get, I think that paucity mindset, which is, I better fill, I may not get again, that's a little, headachy. And the number one thing for me is the right goal, finding the leakage, getting your nutrition up. Okay, you must get your vitamins, calcium, minerals, because without those, the body can't function. Getting your water, getting sodium, these are basics. Beyond that lies the entire realm of which approach works for you. So there's an approach called, I think it's called IIFYM, which means if it fits your macros.
Okay.
So if your macros in this decade of life are demanding a slightly lower carb intake, okay, you go to a slightly higher carb intake or protein intake or whatever. If it fits your current activity levels, you find a diet to map that. If you're not going to be very active, then you have to learn to not eat a couple of days a week, or you skip a couple of meals because you just don't need that much energy. So end of the day, I find that everyone in the human race have to fit their macros based on their level of activity in that decade of life. You can't generalize anything for 7 decades and 8 decades of life. So if you're not very active, you need to look at your weekly, just rough. Okay, am I overdosing on weekends? Can I pull back one day in the week? It's not the cancel culture which I don't like, which is I had a smoothie, now I can eat a burger. This is a tricky one. Or I ate a giant meal, now I'll go and fast the next day. We can't keep balancing the balance sheet. The easier thing is, am I getting my micronutrients? Am I drinking enough water? A simple point of leakage could be a cappuccino.
Yeah.
A cappuccino is 120, 130 calories. An espresso is 0. So can you start removing these small leakages over time?
Very interesting.
Very small. Like I feel that it need not be so big that I'm going to give up rice. You can't tell an Indian to give up rice.
Yeah, yeah.
That's crazy, you know. So you just start cleaning up the small stuff, you know. I think
Interesting. Very interesting. And somebody asked me this question. I should ask you this question as well. Is there a magic food? Does it exist at all? Because people ask about, okay, is there something, if I take, they talk about chia seeds, they talk about, there are multiple things, right, you know, and it's not stopping at some place. Because again, as part of my research coming to this conversation, I was looking at it and I opened a page. Some thesis gave me 121 foods that are magical. And then somebody said it's 86, somebody said 40, somebody said 20. And I went back to Indian ways of like, you know, Ayurveda and all that stuff they were telling. And I'm confused. I said like, okay, I'll drop it off now. I'll go and ask him, is there a magic food?
I wish we would spend less time talking about food and more time talking about exercise, frankly.
Yeah. Okay.
Because food is inevitable.
Okay.
Okay, you're going to eat these superfood categories as we call them. I mean, you can go on talking about food as a source of nutrition or as a source of energy forever. We need to start creating opportunities for activity.
Okay.
That is the real proof of the pudding at the end of the day. Your body is struggling to get rid of these calories. You can't keep talking about the right ones to put in. So essentially, we just want to justify eating certain foods. That's our culture now. Okay? Oh, but I have to eat this because it contains this. It's like telling me milk contains calcium, but I'm going to have 150 calories for this much calcium. Or it contains 3, 5, 7 grams of protein. There are easier ways to get your nutrition than to keep getting
Brilliant.
calorie loaded.
That's amazing. So you mentioned the right thing. So now let's talk about exercise, right? And you call it exercise, you call it as whatever, ways of life and all. What is the minimum, or like, is there a minimum type of activity that everyone should do? And if so, what is it?
I love the negotiation question. It starts out from there. What's the least I can do? You know? Nobody asks that in the food. You know? So what's the max I can eat and add something to cancel all the and give me the least.
Yeah.
See, exercise can start at an Ironman and it can end at a 30-minute walk. So there's a huge spectrum on how much you want to give to that field. But I find exercise to be the greatest source of joy in my life. It gives me clarity. It gives me so much more than just calorie burning. And there is, of course, 3 standard forms of exercise. There's the strength, where you maintain your integrity of your bones and your muscles. Second is the stamina, where your cardiovascular and blood flow and everything. And the third is flexibility. So we need all 3 fitness components in terms of basic fitness, health. And of course, beyond that, you have speed, agility, and things like that, which are more athletic domains. Yeah. But these 3 are non-negotiable on a weekly basis. Okay. So if you go to the gym, just say twice a week, you do upper body once, lower body once, you have serviced your strength. You have moved between 2,000 to 4,000 kgs of weight using the machines. It's good enough. Similarly, you come to stamina. You may walk 30 minutes a day. You might go a little uphill. That's good enough. You know, you don't have to run half a marathon every week. If you're busy, again, I always believe exercise should be decade dosage specific. So in your up to 20, you might do more. 20 to 60, which is the more sort of work related years, you might do less. 60 onwards, you have more time again. And based on how you have nurtured yourself, you might go for gold again. So I think it's very decade specific, but you have to touch strength, stamina, and some form of flexibility, whether it's some kind of Pilates or you like a little bit of yoga, whatever you like. There has to be a little touch base with all 3 in a week. I think that maintains the integrity and reverse ages the skeleton a lot. It also helps your body cope with sugars with the onslaught of calories. Your body has efficient homeostatic mechanisms. Our problem is we don't take care of the hardware. We are obsessed with the software.
So interesting.
Yeah.
It's so true, actually. When you're saying, I can relate to it a lot. Because we think, and one more question I had, Dr. Malhar, is there an element of consistency that becomes really important when it comes to exercise? Or is it, because we see people doing this marathon exercises, like, they do extensive exercise for a month or so, then you stop it. So how important is to be consistent?
I think consistency, discipline are largely are kind of like talent things. Some of us have it, a large percent of us don't have it. And we have a blind eye towards the places where we don't have it. We kind of find workarounds. So end of the day, some people might go to a gym and make it their life's work and passion. And, they don't have to be told to be consistent. The same guy might struggle to go to work.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't see the value in it. I think end of the day, we have to just figure out how deep our motivation levels are for particular areas and don't have what's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is, I know a lot about it means I'm doing it, but I'm not actually doing it. I've just read all about it. The better thing is just in this decade of life, do the right thing. If the right thing is I can go twice a week to the gym, 30 minutes, I can walk a little bit, it's good enough. And I personally believe that the more hobbies you inculcate, so you learn to swim, you just learn some sport, eventually the camaraderie, the friendships is what drives consistency. True. If you're a performance-based person who likes to be alone and race and makes it more of a meditative, competitive pursuit, then that's your thing. But if you're more of a social person who likes that, then make that. But the logistical arrangements, the responsibility lies on you. You can't sit around telling me, there are no people, that's why I don't end up doing it. You have to arrange those clubs. Go make friends like that. You can't, again, the consistency comes from recognizing your primary motivation. Is it social or is it going to be individual? Solve that puzzle, the rest of it takes care of itself.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And the biggest question that comes, I'm sure your clients ask this question as well, because the age now, like in the last 20 years, you have seen the ways of working has changed extensively, and and especially after COVID, right? Hybrid working. You stay home, 3 days, 4 days you're at home, and you eat at your convenience. At least there was what I miss going to office sometimes is I used to have a routine at least. So 8 o'clock you have breakfast, then you go to work, you do calls. 12:30 you have to go for lunch. 12:30 you'll have a certain kind of commitment, and then you know that 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock you have to do something. So you come out and take a coffee, tea, whatever it is. And then a dinner. So there used to be some kind of a pattern which is completely lost because of this hybrid. What happens now is the calls are set up at 12 o'clock and that goes for an hour. So you miss your lunch. And you end up eating lunch at 3 o'clock. And because you ate lunch at 3 o'clock, you eat dinner at like 9, 10. And a lot of people came back to me while talking about this and said that, what is the best rule? Is there something for the working professionals, which is like almost 60% of the population right now in most of the countries, right? Yeah. So what do you say on those kind of particular things? Is there a way to handle it, especially post-COVID situations?
Yeah, I think, the 80-20 principle in the diet and exercise is going to be the 20% of the diet that's going to make 80% of the damage. Most of the time we are eating clean home food, the slight snacking here and there. It's all well budgeted. The problem is the 20%, which you tend to, when you lack a particular micronutrient, you will start having foods that contain that, which are essentially unhealthy. Like there are salted snacks. You actually needed the salt. You could have had a lime water with salt. So when you start to co-opt strategies of foods which in your routine top up micronutrients without calories, you don't touch those foods every day. So like protein, most people who don't have enough protein end up eating a gallon of ice cream at night because essentially the body is just struggling. So I find water, protein and salt are three things the body cannot store per se. So it's always searching for it every day or every second day. So you will go scavenging in the fridge, you open up the cupboards and look for something that contains these three. Instead, start your day topping them up. If you get these three right out of the butt, you had water, you had your salt and you had your protein. By 12 o'clock, if you're done with nutrition, then the rest of the day becomes about stimulants. Stimulants are you want to be high performing at work, so you go and have a little black coffee here and there. That's fine. You may even have a cappuccino or two. It's okay. But that you're not becoming dosage dependent because you're not treating something as a source of nutrition when all it is calories. So I think as we get profit driven, profit essentially is where's my nutrition coming from. So, I think it's not very hard. I've worked with a lot of 130, 140 kg people. Again, the mistake that they make is the amount of micronutrients that they need has to be proportionate to 140 kg body. You're still using RDAs, which are for 70 kg humans. You need twice the micronutrients. So problem is when they underdose, they tend to overeat. So these are very small things in the world of obesity. You double the dose of micronutrients, you'll half the dose of something else.
Having that awareness is extremely important, right?
Yeah, I think that kind of prescription has to come from our doctors as well.
Correct.
Which is saying,
But my question to in that particular element, what I was asking Dr. Malhar is how important it is for people to take breaks. They work this kind of extensive. I mean, you come from India.
Yeah.
And the culture of GCC
there's a
is
lot
global.
of hassle now. Yeah.
There's such a hassle, and people are struggling a lot. And you end up like you're 35, you end up getting severe attacks.
Yeah. There's a lot
It could be panic attacks. It could be your cardiac arrest. And we have seen a number of stories in the recent times. So, the reason I'm asking that question is how important is it to take breaks? And what is the rule of any breaks? Do you actually suggest anything in that space?
Yeah, I think we do tell people to, there's a lot of meetings where you can be seen and not heard. So it's not necessary to be that high-strung driven where you're all the time on the edge. And what I liked about the Aussie Kiwi culture, to be honest with you, was I could have lived there. But, again, that Indian gene where it's just, I got to do something, I got to, make a name for myself. It's a little driven. But I love that laid-back culture where for them work was something they did when they were not with their hobbies. So their hobbies drove their existence. They also worked. Amazing. With us Indians, it's all about the 12, 14-hour hustle because we just raised like that till we don't feel a sense of worthiness till you have achieved something professionally, which is, I think, a little, we have to search passe now. We have reached a point where most people have sufficient, those who are well educated, they can start to pause somewhere at 40, 45. Like a lot of the patients I see 40, they tell me, that we're just tired of the hustle now. So what next? Yeah, we are making decent money, we own a decent house. It's a choice now. Do you upscale the house? Do you buy an even bigger place? Do you immigrate? These are all puzzles that you need to answer instinctually, or is it just an incomplete cycle? So I think you need breaks from your daily routine to think this through. And to go for a 5K walk once or twice a week where you're just thinking about these questions.
Giving time to yourself.
Going for a meditation course.
Yeah.
All these things can and have to be brought in at 40. Otherwise, you can't. Again, it's cancel culture. I'm very stressed. I went for a 3-day retreat and I'm back to that toxic thing. So,
and it's so common now, Dr. Malhar. I'm sure you would have heard about a lot of your clients because what people do is, okay, I'm stressed. I'll take Christmas break. I'll go to retreat center. It's almost like you're giving rehabilitation to yourself, which is not right. It needs to be brought into regular life. And I love the way you mentioned about the culture of living life, right? I mean, you mentioned about, you have your larger life and work is part of it.
Part of it, yeah.
But to be honest, for most of the working profession, that's not the case.
Yeah, again.
It's like work is my life and everything else comes next.
Yeah. And I like what Elon Musk said, in the middle. He said that slowly we're going to bring in AI and things like that. A lot of jobs are going to inherently get replaced from a day-to-day 8 to 10 hour perspective. So what are you going to do when you don't have sort of what he calls mindless repetitive tasks? Not everyone is built for creativity. Like industrialization finally reached a point where robots were doing a lot of it. So now what? So again, not everyone pivoted to an intellectual IT economy. So I think everybody is going to have to figure out for themselves, just like you figure out the food, you're going to have to figure out how do you find purpose once work starts becoming a smaller part of your day. And this is the primary question I get at work every day. Okay, I've got diabetic, but the larger question is, what do I do with myself?
I know.
And that's a tricky one. It's not so simple.
It's not a fit for all purpose kind of response as well, because every individual is different. Every individual has their own kind of metabolic process, their own kind of creative process, their own kind of living life.
Where do you find flow and your life philosophy and what sort of spiritual background you want to choose. So I think I find the 4 buckets which I've always kind of tried to solve was, the first one was the professional bucket, because we draw a lot of our existential identity and sort of security from there, which is cash flow and things like that. So the first one is profession. Second one is familial, for those who choose to have families and bring them up, or they have their family, their parents whom they're taking care of. The third bucket is the health bucket. And the fourth bucket is the spiritual bucket. And I find these 4 buckets, everybody's trying to engage with all 4 at the same time. And as they say, you can go through phases of life where each bucket starts to gain more relevance, and you start to reduce intentionally relevance of another. The myth is that you can run all 4 on all cylinders.
Yeah.
I think family, after a point, especially next generation, you have to start to detach a little, because they will detach from you. But the same thing happens with the profession. Jobs will become redundant. So you have to have an existence beyond this.
So true.
So I think spiritual, of course, and the fourth one is health. But I find by the time people let go the profession and the family thing, the health is already under the pump.
You remember the Pebble story from the Oxford University? They do this case study where you have given the glass, then given pebbles, sand, mud, and
There's
water.
no place left.
There's no place left. Yeah, choose your pebbles, right? I mean, that very interesting. And that brings me to last part of the conversation, Malhar. You are in London for a reason. Do you want to explain me? By the way, guys, I mean, Malhar is here to present in the British Parliament. He's talking today in British Parliament, which is very proud moment for all of us. So what are you going to talk about, and why are you here? What are you trying to tell the world?
Yeah, we're essentially, one is, of course, we're looking at the socio-economic changes now when it comes to health, and having policy changes which kind of now help people make easier choices, especially with their food intake and things like that. And I find that ready-to-eat meals are going to be a larger part of our thing. So one of the companies I've co-founded is Kilobeaters, which is an actual company where we are creating vegetarian breakfast with protein, because I have
Kilobeaters.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of our participants struggle for protein breakfast. Those of the world that have eggs and stuff do get it, but the others tend to go back on native food, and Indian food is not protein heavy. So I've seen a lot of deficiency in terms of protein. So that's one of the reasons I'm here. We want people to increase protein in their food actively. The other thing, of course, is children, child health and stuff like that. We really want children to transition to pre-packaged food, which is targeted nutrition, like the proteins of the world, which what they did for the gym industry and for fitness, they made it convenient. One of the main things I'm here for is to kind of now look at policy changes, schools and all other places where we can go to the source, where children get targeted nutrition.
So are you going to talk to the audience in the Parliament today?
Yeah, the topic will be on this.
Specifically? Okay.
Specifically for a lot of things. Essentially, like I said, we have to take cognizance that calories are here to stay. Nutrition is something we have to actively now enable. And like I said, it's the lower economic stratas that are going to pay the maximum brunt. And they are the ones who tend to seek a lot of help from the NHS. And as you see, the burden of the medical costs now are rising across the board.
Extremely high.
It's starting with the food choices. So if we can bring in nutrition there, I remember I read a study in Canada where they said $1 spent on prevention of heart attacks saves almost $1,000 at the other end. So there's 1,000x there. And that was a fascinating study, that prevention.
But it's about that policy making that drives this, right? I mean, whether you are ready. Same in India. Forget about
everywhere. It's global.
But especially in India. I was speaking to one of the health ministers from southern state in my show recently, and then he was like, we spend tons of money, crores of money on health schemes and all. I was like, okay, amazing, but how much you spend on prevention? He's like, there's no budget for prevention.
Yeah. We are always post facto, which is all, again, it's more active iron deficiency. And we are more, again, child malnourishment is still again, there are 2 Indias, right? This is one which is the undernourished one and one is the overnourished one. But that's true of almost any society now.
Hope you get enough attention from there. My last question of the show today is basically, there is this stereotyping. I'm not trying to stereotypic question it is, but one of the kids asked me this question recently. So we were watching Olympics, recent ones, just on the TV, and he was like, why do you see always sprinters coming from African countries?
Yeah.
And why do you see always all these engineers coming from India? Like, is there something like that? I mean, does it really matter? Geography does affect your
of course it does.
Or like, why do we always see all the sprint winners coming from Africa. Have you ever thought about it? I mean, how does it?
If you talk to the Kenyans, there were lots of Danish study where they tried to say that it's the length of the Achilles tendon which is why the Kenyans are far, or their limb length is longer, or it's the ugali in the diet. It's not true. It is just generations of phenomenal gene, that has come through the lineage, and it's a purified gene combined with fantastic training,
I know.
combined with the environment, the high altitude, then the clean food. It's all of it.
Combination of various
You
things.
take an Indian or you take a non-athletic genotype and put it in Africa, you're not suddenly going to get an athlete. It's not so simple. I'm just saying that we have to stop looking for single causes. And if you take certain races which are very good at sprinting, yes, you can do a muscle fiber biopsy. You will see greater type 2 fibers in certain, you'll see greater type 1s in the Kenyans. It is what it is. Indians, as Sachin Tendulkar famously said, Indians take students to tuitions, whereas Aussies takes children to cricket classes.
Cricket clubs.
It's just what it is. Okay, and I think it's a hobby and affluence thing. See, children in India will always be parent pleasers, which is a culture we have to get rid of. Till 30, 35, that's why when Indians go abroad, they stop trying to please their parents and they liberate themselves. But when they live there, it takes a long time to outlive your inheritance, baggage. But once you do that, I think Indians really now in the last 10, 15 years are really coming of age.
Brilliant. It's amazing. It's such a brilliant conversation. I can go on and on, Dr. Malhar, but I know you're busy. No. You have this schedule with the Parliament coming up as well. Thank you so much for your time today. And I'm sure, audience, you have learned a lot of things today. We touched wide variety of topics. We touched about obesity. We touched on diabetes. We touched on child care. And we touched on, mental health issues at the kids and all that stuff. I hope some of our parents who are watching this do learn from this conversation. And I love the way you mentioned about the three categorization, how you have to kind of bring the balance and all that stuff. Hope that is helpful. Thank you so much for watching this conversation today. I'll come back again with another guest with a very insightful conversation. Thank you so much, guys.